Good afternoon. First, I'd like to acknowledge that the story I'm going to tell is built on work that a lot of other people have done together in coalition. Obviously, the port truck drivers they're going to talk about, but also some colleagues here in the room from the Teamsters and former colleague Ron Carver, who spent many years trying to bring dignity to port truck drivers. The strike that John referred to at the Port of Seattle this winter, one of the headlines coming out of the strike was Seattle Port truck drivers strike challenges independent contractor lie. So that's, I'm going to try to tell the story to explain first what is it that, what group of workers are we talking about, and what is the lie, and what are we trying to do about it. So the port trucking, and I guess framing this, that the chart that John was describing of the ascension of corporations starting about 30 years ago tracks very nicely with the deterioration of middle-class jobs in the trucking industry, and particularly port trucking, because it coincides with deregulating trucking in this country around 1980, when previously these jobs were predominantly union jobs in a more equitably regulated industry. The rug was pulled out from under drivers in the 1980s, and we've seen a steady decline in their working conditions since then. So port trucking is the segment of the supply chain where drivers haul these freight containers in and out of ports to a local rail terminal, warehouse, or local delivery. It's a sort of short haul piece of the trucking. There's about 100,000 port truck drivers that haul containers in and out of major port terminals. There's about a dozen or so major terminals where most trade comes in and out of this country, the largest, Los Angeles and Long Beach, where about 40% of imports come into this country, including a lot of the goods that are manufactured in China that we'll hear about. So these jobs are a product of free trade and global trade, globalization, and they're predominantly immigrants from different countries of origin, depending on the port that you're talking about. But these drivers have to have commercial driver's licenses and pass background and immigration checks in order to get a transportation worker identification credential. That's a requirement post 9/11, where drivers have to get a TWIC card in order to actually work. These drivers work predominantly for small trucking firms, which act as brokers because most of them own any trucks or employ any drivers, and that's the lie that we're going to talk about. But these trucking companies have the contracts with the big retail giants like Walmart, Target, Home Depot, Best Buy, to haul the goods that are packed in containers weighing 80,000 pounds. That are going down the highways. These drivers are dispatched by their employer to pick up and drop off a container, where a longshoreman then takes the container off the ship and puts it on a truck. But before that happens, drivers will spend hours waiting in line in 3 or 4 different lines to get into a terminal and get the right equipment. So the contractor lied. It's since deregulation, the fiction of ownership of the truck has been the lever that companies have used to dictate conditions and prevent bargaining over them amongst these drivers. They're hired as independent contractors when they're really employees. In other words, they generally work exclusively for one trucking company at a time, and often for many, many years. For that same company, and where they have to lease their company the truck that they supposedly own, but they actually don't have any practical ownership of that truck. So they're workers. But the industry says they're small business people, and so under the law, they can't actually talk about how much they make or advocate together collectively to increase their pay, because that would be an antitrust violation under the law. So in Seattle, these drivers went on strike because of unsafe working conditions, and that is legal under the law, even for small businesses. They're paid by the load, so when they're waiting in line for hours and hours, they're eating that. They're paying that cost. So their employers don't really care if the container gets to its destination in 3 hours or 6 hours, except in certain cases where the customer, like Walmart, really needs that stuff on time. Okay, so there's a lot of sort of tension in this supply chain. So in Seattle, I think a driver sent a video message to Secretary of Labor Hilda Solis describing their situation and calling on the Department of Labor to investigate the misclassification of them as small business people. They call us independent businessmen. What business? They own the business. We don't own the business. They tell us what to do. They tell us where to go. They even tell us how much they're going to pay us. They don't play by the rules. They are not regulated. This cannot be happening in the United States. But unfortunately, it very much is. So what happens is drivers haul a container, they get paid by the load, but out of that they have to pay for the fuel, the insurance, they often have to pay to park the truck on the company's yard for cell phones, everything you can imagine. So at the end of the day, these drivers can have weeks where they actually owe their employer money because they didn't make enough to make a living. So some weeks they make $100 or $50. Then they'd have a good week where they may, make $1,000. So it's really, at the whim of their employers, what loads they give them, how much work, but they still make all the deductions for operating a trucking company that supposedly these drivers work for. So that's the employment situation. One of the consequences of that is these drivers can't afford new equipment. So ports are known as the place where old trucks go to die. The oldest equipment ends up at the port, and that's created a public health crisis around a number of ports which are concentrated in dense urban areas like the city of Los Angeles, which there are a lot of reasons why the air quality is bad there, but the port of LA and Long Beach is one of them. And so there's and the drivers know this because they're breathing in these toxic diesel fumes every day. So that's the situation. What we're so we've been working for many years to end this precariousness, to restore the rights amongst these drivers who play a critical role in our economy. Without them, our shelves would be largely bare. So several years ago, we decided that we needed to build a broad coalition, and it centered around Ground Zero in Los Angeles, where there was a public health crisis because of all the diesel pollution from these old trucks. And we decided that we needed to get out of the old paradigm of jobs versus the environment, labor versus environmental groups, and we built a coalition that where we work together to find a solution and we came up with the motto that we can have clean air and good jobs. And recognized that in order to have buy new equipment that had diesel particulate filters that could reduce pollution, you actually, the companies should pay for the equipment instead of the workers. So we need to shift the cost to the responsible parties. These big corporations should be paying for the trucks and not push down all the costs onto their workforce. It culminated a few years ago when the Port of LA, which is controlled by the city of Los Angeles, passed a clean truck program that was wildly successful in terms of cleaning up the pollution, where now that's the one port in the country where all the trucks are just a couple years old. They've reduced pollution from the trucks in LA by 80%. The downside is that our courts have struck in the labor provisions that would have required the companies to keep paying for these trucks. So we're still battling, but it has significantly changed the industry and created new opportunities for us to restore the rights of these workers, because they're now, many of them in LA really don't own the truck. The companies own the truck, but the companies say you have to lease it from me in order to keep working, or they just have to rent it, or don't even have a lease agreement, but you're still an independent contractor and a small business person, even though you don't own a truck or lease a truck or rent a truck, but you're going to pay for the truck, and you're an independent contractor. So we've been able to appeal to federal and state agencies that are supposed to enforce this kind of misclassification of where companies can treat workers as independent contractors when they're really employees. And so the Department of Labor and federally and state have been really looking into this and started investigations to crack down on these kind of abuses. And it's more and more obvious in places like LA where these drivers don't own these trucks. And then finally, a lot of these drivers have said enough is enough, and that's what happened in Seattle this winter when hundreds of drivers walked off the job because, hey, we get tickets for the equipment that we don't own, that we can't afford, and they walked off the job for a couple weeks, and has begun to change some of this dynamic. So this is finally. I'll end with one breakthrough bright spot, which is we recently won union recognition for a group of drivers in Los Angeles. And that was part of a global campaign where an Australian-based global logistics company came into the United States, bought a company. We, for this past year, have been working with the Australian Transport Workers Union because the company is unionized there, but came into the U.S., in which often these companies do decide to play by the rules of American labor law and hire union busters and treat these workers horribly. Where even these drivers at this company, Toll, were actually treated as employees, but didn't have sanitary bathrooms, didn't have clean running water, didn't have shelter in the yards, and they were fed up. And just a couple weeks ago, won a union election, got certified by the NLRB, and that's seen as has created a buzz amongst drivers, whether they're treated, whether they're W-2 employees or 1099 independent contractors, that if they stick together, we can fight through this and win, and that's our charge moving forward, is to build on that victory. So I'll end there and look forward to the discussion. Thanks. Thank you.